Good morning, and it's wonderful to have this opportunity to present at this conference. I am presenting not only on the behalf of my co-authors, whose name you can see here, but also on behalf of the entire field team which was involved in the study. I would also like to thank all the sanitation workers who participated willingly in this study. This study would not have been what it is without their participation. A little bit of introduction maybe before we move on to study. In India, there's a mix of mechanical and manual de-sludging. In the two cities in which the study was done, most of the de-sludging was mechanized and the operators had trucks. There was on-demand de-sludging and there was a robust but informal market of the operators. So the objective of the study was really to add to the very scarce literature on de-sludging that exists globally and identify what were the safety and health concerns for de-sludging workers. A point that I would like to make here was that we did not go with any preconceived notion of what those safety issues would be, but really tried an intense ethnographic approach to understand what were the existing practices, what were the existing safety concerns, and what were the underlying causes for it. Based on this, we have also developed a preliminary set of recommendations. Now, coming to the approach and methodology, two things that I want to highlight is that we used a systems thinking approach, which meant that the study that we did was iterative and different methods fed into each other. We were essentially also trying to understand deeper and underlying causes for different safety concerns. So using formal techniques like the 5 Why tool, which is just one of them, we were actually looking at what was the actual reasons for the existing practices and concerns. The other thing I want to highlight here is process documentation. As you'll see in the coming slides, we spent literally days and nights with the workers themselves to understand the work that they did in great amount of detail, and the rest of the study followed on from that. A quick word on the limitations. Caste is extremely central to sanitation work in India, but that was not the emphasis of the study. And second is that this sample presented in this study does not include women operators. We subsequently did go and study them, but this study does not cover that. So like I said, we analyzed the de-sludging process in a great amount of detail. You probably cannot read the graphic on the right side, but as you can see that the process was divided into 55 steps across 4 zones. There were 3 primary zones: traveling to the site of work, the actual process of de-sludging, and then finally disposal at the site. There was also a zone 3, which was entry into septic tanks. Needless to say, this was illegal and inhuman, and this did not occur in all the instances of de-sludging that we studied, but happened in some. We identified safety concerns at each step and also identified critical decision making steps which could add or reduce the amount of safety for the worker. This is to give you a snapshot of that process. You can see the critical decision making points. You can also see how we've highlighted the steps which pose safety concerns. So what were the safety concerns that emerged? So by far the biggest safety concern that emerged was inhalation of harmful gases or lack of oxygen. The reason we are saying and or is because this requires more work, but what is clear that that non-standard septic tanks, which is prevalent in the cities that we worked in, but also in other cities in India and elsewhere, do pose a danger. And also one of the key things that will emerge in this presentation is also the use of chemical agents for cleaning over the last few years have added to the danger. Again, this requires a little bit of study, but based on our interviews and also the newspaper reporting across the country, it seems that inhalation of gas is causing unconsciousness, causing the workers to slip, and it actually could possibly be one of the major causes of deaths. The other 2 concerns were contact with sludge. This can happen at multiple points, and also physical injury. The physical injury happened both because of unsuitable work environments, as you can see in some of the photos, but also using inadequate or badly designed equipment for actually doing some of the work. So we also interviewed a lot of workers, and the illustration at the bottom is actually an illustration by a sanitation worker who was tracing his journey over the decades. As you can see, there's been a transition for the better, but this also means that many of the sanitation workers actually think there's not much of a concern, safety concerns right now. However, they were aware of various acts. They were also aware of various problems, health problems they had, even though they may not be able to connect it to the professions. They also had indigenous methods of taking care of themselves. And the final point I want to see, they were very aware that of their own profession, in a sense that they were aware that the septic tank entry was not caused because of anything inadequacy in the work they did by them, but because of household actions, as you can see as a quote on the right hand side. And they were also able to provide absolutely relevant and to the point feedback on various aspects of safety, including septic tank design, tools and PPE. So, once we had talked to the sanitation workers, mapped out the processes, and when we were moving on to recommendations, we kind of looked at whole lot of different areas of intervention that arrive from our work, and then try to map it on to the hierarchy of controls. And obviously, as we know, that our aim was to see what we could get on the elimination, substitution and engineering control sides, rather than just on the PP. So, in elimination, it's not possible to remove the process of de-sludging itself as long as they're on-site systems, but I think the entry into tanks can and should be eliminated. For that, we discovered both functional and non-functional reasons for entry, and for both these reasons, the step that had to be done actually involved doing sensitization and training and awareness for different stakeholders, be it the client and households, masons, or the de-sludging workers, and you can see some of the awareness messages on the right hand side. On the substitution side, the primary mechanism of substitution also is absolutely shifting from manual to mechanical. On the engineering control side, we actually discovered a rich set of things that could be done, and as you can see, it involved exploration of blockage removal tools, because blockage was one of the key things that has emerged as a concern over and over again. Testing of various air blowing techniques for removal of gases, but also apart from improvement in tools, looking at improvements in septic tank design, looking at improvements in truck design, looking at improvement in treatment facilities where disposal is done. There is huge potential for interventions right across different locations and places to improve, make the work safer. Coming to administrative control, I think we all have been speaking about standard operating procedure. The only thing I want to highlight here is that it may be less of a standard operating procedure and more of do's and don'ts kind of a thing, because of wide variety, to which I will speak a bit later. And not only do we need a standard operating procedure, we also need a procedure for emergency and first aid protocol, which is very important given the precarious conditions for some of these workers. We also need improved enforcement and monitoring. We talk a lot about personal protective equipment, and I just want to highlight that mere provisioning is not enough. There are serious design issues. We've got reports from the workers where use of ill-fitting boots or gloves has actually increased the risk at their work instead of decreasing it. So the way we look at it in a two-pronged way. First is if the non-usage of PPE is happening because of bad design, because of functional reasons, that could be addressed by design, supplemented by training. There is also lack of awareness or lack of willingness to use these PPE, in which case sensitization becomes critical. We carried out a preliminary design study, which raises the important point that we do not have to start designing from scratch for some of these equipment. There are things available in the market that can be adapted, or we could be borrowing from other industries. To conclude, the first key finding of this study is that PPE is actually the last line of defense, and actually, as you can see, there are rich range of interventions one can carry out to address safety concerns. Now, all of these may not be possible in one location, and even as a next step, we are trying to prioritize these interventions as well as looking at feasibility of these interventions in the cities that we work in, but definitely one needs to go beyond PPE. Secondly, I would say it's very important to understand that in de-sludging in India and in many other countries is informal. So, what does that mean? That means that there is, first of all, there is a wide variation that happens, which raises the question of, can we really have a uniform policy, uniform designs, or do we really need to be looking at things more granularly and more contextually? It also raises to me the feasibility of scaling some of these initiatives, and these are the hard questions we need to ask ourselves, because if many of these enterprises are informal, which means that their business models may not allow investments in their own safety, in different safety measures, or it may just not be so easy to scale up. But it's very, very important to understand the informality of these businesses before we try to design a program. I think we also need to look at occupational safety within overall vulnerability of the worker's life. And here I want to bring out 2-3 points. One is that often the responsibility is placed on them, and that's not fair. I think there is a role, as you can see, there is behaviors of households that need to change. There needs to be monitoring and awareness done by the government side. So clearly the responsibility cannot lie only on the sanitation workers. There are also narratives that sanitation workers are negligent about their own safety. I think before kind of making statements like this, if we need to understand why they are saying what they are saying. Like I said, there are very good reasons for them not using PPE or other tools, and we really need to listen to them better. Occupational safety also needs to be understood within the context of their life, in places where they do not have social security system, where they do not have access to medical facilities for their families, in areas where they may be staying in extremely hazardous living conditions. The safety concerns at the top of their mind may not be occupational ones, and we need to really respect that and understand that. And what this really comes to is that while working with sanitation workers, we've realized that they have immense knowledge. They have worked in this area for a large time, and they really need to be active participants in designing these initiatives. I think we overuse the word leverage to mean a lot of things, but I really think we should be leveraging the tacit knowledge that exists with these workers and design programs while listening to them. Thanks once more for the opportunity to present at this conference, and our contact details, as you can see, our slides. We're happy to answer any queries you might have.